The rope dug into Alara's wrists as her feet scrambled for purchase on the rocky ledge. 8 months pregnant, her swollen belly made balance nearly impossible as she clung to the cliff's edge. Below her, a 100-foot drop promised certain death. Above, laughter echoed, the same voices that had pushed her toward this precipice. "For the child inside me, I must live," she whispered to herself, fingers bleeding as they clutched at exposed roots and jagged stone. The baby kicked inside her, as if responding to her determination. 1 inch at a time, Ilara pulled herself upward, muscles screaming, sweat stinging her eyes despite the cool mountain air. Just as her hand reached the cliff's rim, a boot stepped on her fingers. She bit back a scream. "Look who crawled back," a man's voice sneered. "The eagle who can no longer fly." Rough hands hauled her over the edge, not to save her but to bind her. Ilara did not struggle. She had no strength left for fighting, only for surviving. They threw her onto the back of a wagon like a sack of grain, her ceremonial clothes replaced by rough sackcloth that barely covered her swollen body. The journey to the border market took 3 days, during which she received only enough water to keep her alive and the child within her still moving. The border market thronged with bodies beneath a punishing sun. Coarse laughter mingled with tobacco spit and the percussion of hooves against weathered planks, the soundtrack of human bartering. Particles of dust suspended in the air fractured sunlight into golden shards. At the center of this spectacle, Ilara maintained her dignity despite the weight of iron shackles biting into the tender flesh of her ankle. Her stepmother Najoni's proclamation sliced through the market's din. "This one brings nothing but shame to our tribe. Her womb carries enemy seed. Name your price for her labor and the extra merchandise she'll soon deliver." Crude amusement rippled through the onlookers. "2 souls for 1 price," someone shouted from the back. Another voice called out, "I'll take her for my stable work." Ilara bowed her head, but not in submission. Her bound fingers curled into fists tight enough to draw blood, a gesture born of indignation rather than fear. Once celebrated as Ilara Eagle Eye, the Chiricahua's keenest scout, and one of few women granted a voice in tribal councils, she now stood reduced to chattel, valued only for the work her body might perform. Najoni stepped forward, shoulders squared with practiced authority. The older woman's public demeanor was cutting, but for the briefest moment, so brief Ilara almost missed it. Her eyes darted across the gathering crowd with calculating assessment rather than hatred. Then, just as quickly, the mask of contempt returned. "She brings no more glory to the tribe," Najoni announced, her voice deliberately harsh, carrying to the farthest corners of the market. "Her belly carries the seed of our enemy. Whoever wants her labor, name your price. There's another piece of merchandise in her belly." As bidding began, Ilara noticed something peculiar. Najoni's dismissive gestures towards several eager bidders, her subtle head shake when a particularly brutal-looking trader raised his hand. The woman seemed to be waiting for something or someone. The crowd erupted in laughter like firecrackers. "2 for 1 price," a man shouted. "2 lives. I'll buy her to tend my horses," another called out. Ilara lowered her head, her bound hands clenched so hard they bled. Not out of fear, but out of shame. She had once been Ilara Eagle Eye, the most skilled scout of the Chiricahua Apache, one of the few women allowed to join in hunting parties and tribal councils. Now she was merchandise, valued only for the work her body could provide. Amid the filthy noise, a lone figure stood under the shadow of an old porch. His cowboy hat hid half his face, leaving only a steady, blue-eyed gaze visible beneath it. His weathered coat spoke of hard years on the frontier, but he stood with the straight posture of a man who knew his purpose. Thomas Reed, a rancher from the northern hills. As the bidding continued, growing more degrading with each offer, Thomas stepped forward, moving silently through the crowd. Without a word, he placed $200 on the wooden table, far more than any other offer. The whole market went silent. When Thomas placed his money on the table, Ilara caught an almost imperceptible change in Najoni's posture. A slight relaxing of her shoulders, a fleeting look that might have been relief quickly disguised. The older woman accepted his payment with a brusque efficiency that seemed oddly rehearsed, avoiding Ilara's questioning gaze. "What are you buying her for?" one man asked, his voice laced with contempt and innuendo. Thomas answered quietly, his voice low but firm. I'm not buying her. I'm buying back her freedom. Laughter erupted once more. That's money wasted. Injuns don't understand what freedom's worth. And you don't know how priceless it is, Thomas replied, his eyes cold as winter. Without waiting for a response, he knelt and unlocked the chain from Alara's ankle. He took off his coat and draped it gently over her shoulders, adjusting it to cover her protruding belly that had been the subject of so many stares and crude jokes. As Thomas helped Alara to her feet, he did not touch her more than necessary, just rested his hand lightly on her back, a simple gesture full of humanity that made her stiffen with suspicion. No one had touched her with anything but cruelty for months. As they left the market behind, dust swirling in their wake, Alara puzzled over Najoni's behavior. The woman who had seemingly orchestrated her final humiliation had also, strangely, appeared almost selective about who would claim her. It made no sense, unless there was more to this transaction than simple cruelty. The thought was too confusing to entertain amidst her exhaustion, yet it lingered like an unresolved note in a familiar song. The road from the market back to Thomas's ranch stretched endlessly across golden prairie grass swaying in the late afternoon breeze. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the landscape in amber light. Alara sat on the wagon bench beside Thomas, one hand clutching her tight, swollen belly, cold sweat gathering at her temples. Fatigue weighed on her bones, yet her senses remained razor-sharp, like a mountain lion backed against a cliff face, conserving strength while calculating every possibility. Periodically, Thomas cast sidelong glances her way, the furrows in his sun-leathered face deepening with unspoken concern. Is the pain severe? He asked after she winced at a particularly rough bump in the road. I've endured worse, Alara answered curtly, her voice hoarse from days without adequate water. Thomas's reply came softly. I didn't ask what you could endure. I asked if you were in pain. Alara fell silent, startled by the distinction. It had been so long since anyone had cared about her comfort rather than her utility. As the sun set completely, they crested a hill, and Thomas gestured ahead. Valley of Hope, he said simply. Below them stretched a small valley nestled between two rolling hills, protected from harsh winds. A two-story wooden house stood in the center, flanked by a large stable, a vegetable garden out back, and a small creek running through the property. Alara's eyes caught on something unexpected. A solitary grave beneath a massive old oak tree, fresh flowers laid upon it. The sight sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the evening air. The bedroom Thomas showed her to was clean and comfortable, with a single bed, warm quilts, and a small dressing table, as if it had been prepared specifically for a woman's arrival. Alara stood awkwardly in the doorway, her instincts screaming that this must be a trap. Nothing was given freely in this world, especially not to a pregnant Apache woman discarded by her own people. You should rest, Thomas said, placing a tray of food on the bedside table. There's clean water in the pitcher, and clothes in the dresser that might fit you. He stepped back, giving her space. No one will disturb you here. Alara's dark eyes narrowed with suspicion. What do you want in return? She asked bluntly, her hand instinctively moving to protect her belly. Thomas paused in the doorway, his expression somber. Not everything has a price, Alara. Some things we do because they're right. Before she could question how he knew her name, he added, I'll be sleeping downstairs if you need anything. The door has no lock. I don't believe in cages. After he left, Alara examined the room carefully, checking under the bed and in the closet for any hidden dangers. She found a small knife in the dresser drawer and immediately tucked it under her pillow. As she moved about the room, something fell from Thomas's coat, which she still wore around her shoulders. A small photograph. She picked it up cautiously. It showed an Apache woman with an infant. The woman's face was familiar somehow, though Alara couldn't place her. She quickly hid the photograph, another piece in the puzzle of Thomas Reed. Despite her exhaustion, Alara ate sparingly, testing each bite for strange tastes that might indicate poison or sedatives. Only after ensuring the food was safe did she allow herself to truly eat, though she remained seated rather than lying down, back against the headboard, knife within easy reach. Eventually, her eyes grew too heavy to keep open, but even in sleep, her body remained tense, ready to flee. Morning light streamed through the window when Alara awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented. The events of the previous day rushed back, and her hand flew to her belly, still there, still moving. She breathed a sigh of relief. From her window, she could see Thomas already at work, repairing a section of fence. His movements were methodical and practiced, his body moving with the efficient rhythm of a man accustomed to physical labor. What puzzled her was the contradiction. His calloused hands and weathered face spoke of frontier hardship, but his speech and manner hinted at education and refinement. As she watched him work, fragments of her past flashed through her mind. Once she had been Alara Eagle Eye, renowned for her ability to spot game from impossible distances. Her father, a tribal elder, had broken tradition to train her in hunting and scouting when her brothers all died of the white man's diseases. She had earned her place in the tribal council through skill and intelligence. Then came the cavalry and their demands for interpreters. Alara was chosen for her quick mind and ability to learn languages. That was where she met Captain Harrison, tall, handsome, with promises as golden as his hair. He swore he would protect her people if she helped him, if she became his. What a fool she had been to believe him. When she discovered her pregnancy, Harrison's loving words turned to disgust. He denied everything, called her a savage whore where once he had called her my desert flower. The army dismissed her as a plaything past its use, and her tribe cast her out as a traitor. Her own father, the elder, pronounced her sentence. Better to kill the child of the enemy when it draws its first breath than let it poison our bloodline. Only Najoni, her stepmother, had shown any reaction other than contempt, a strange calculating look that Alara couldn't decipher. She had expected Najoni to celebrate her downfall, as they had never been close. Instead, Najoni had been the one to sell her at the border market, a final humiliation that still burned in Alara's chest. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Thomas stood there with a tray of food and a bundle of cloth. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the tray down without entering. "And there are some clothes that might be more comfortable. They belong to—" He trailed off, then simply said, "They're yours if you want them." Alara's gaze was sharp, searching his face for deception. "Why are you doing this? What do you really want?" Thomas's blue eyes met hers directly. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Alara, even those who've been broken and mistreated." She laughed bitterly. "And who broke you, Thomas Reed? What ghosts make you wake before dawn and work until your hands bleed?" A shadow passed over his face, and for a moment, Alara thought she had pushed too far. But he only said, "When you're ready, there's work to be done outside. Not because you owe me, but because idle hands make for troubled minds. I've found that to be true, at least." Then he was gone, leaving Alara with more questions than answers. As days passed, Alara began to venture from her room, first to the kitchen, then to the porch, and finally to the stables. The horses fascinated her, powerful creatures that could carry a person far away. Yet they stayed willingly. Thomas kept fine animals, treating them with a gentle firmness that earned their trust. One afternoon, she stood watching as he struggled to calm a new mare, a beautiful bay with wild eyes. The horse reared and snorted, refusing the bridle. "May I?" Alara asked, stepping forward. Thomas glanced at her, surprised by the offer, then handed her the lead rope. "Be careful. She's never been properly broken." "That's because she doesn't need breaking," Alara replied. She approached the mare slowly, speaking softly in Apache. The horse's ears pricked forward, listening. "We have both been chained," she whispered, "but neither of us wants to be chained again." To Thomas's amazement, the mare calmed, allowing Alara to stroke her neck. Within minutes, she had slipped the bridle on without resistance. "How did you do that?" he asked, genuine respect in his voice. "Animals know who respects them and who fears them," she replied. "Like people, they want dignity." That evening, as Alara sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson, Thomas joined her, maintaining a respectful distance. They sat in silence for a long moment, listening to the wind whisper through the valley. "There were things I thought had died in this house long ago," Thomas finally said. "Laughter, hope, even simple peace." "I thought I was dead too," she replied softly. "But perhaps I was only sleeping, waiting for the right place to wake up." It was the closest thing to trust she had offered since arriving, and Thomas seemed to recognize it as the gift it was. He nodded, then pointed to a cluster of stars just becoming visible in the eastern sky. The Apache have names for those stars, don't they? For the first time in months, Alara felt something like peace as she began to share the stories her father had taught her about the night sky. Thomas listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, and for a moment, just a moment, the walls around her heart thinned just slightly. Late that night, Alara woke to voices downstairs. Moving silently across the wooden floor, she crept to the top of the stairs, listening. "It happened 20 years ago, Joseph. I still haven't atoned for it." Thomas's voice was strained, carrying the weight of old pain. "The past is the past, Tom." The second voice belonged to a man Alara hadn't seen before. "You've saved more lives than most men ever will." "Not enough. Never enough to balance the scales. Is that why you took in the Apache woman? Another soul for your collection of strays?" Thomas's reply was sharp. "She's not a stray. She's a woman who deserves dignity, not your judgment or my pity." Alara retreated back to her room, mind racing. While searching for a candle, her hand brushed against something metal in the back of a drawer. Pulling it out, she found an army button and a badge from the 7th Cavalry Regiment, the unit known for numerous attacks on Apache tribes, the same unit Captain Harrison had served in. The pieces began to fall into place. Thomas Reed had been a soldier, perhaps even involved in massacres of her people. Now he lived in isolation, taking in those society had discarded. What sin was he trying to atone for? And what did it have to do with her? Sleep eluded her as she pondered these questions. Through her window, she could see Thomas sitting alone on the porch, a bottle of whiskey beside him, his gaze fixed on the southern horizon as if watching for ghosts approaching from the distance. Around his neck, she noticed for the first time, hung half of a medallion with Apache designs, a pattern she recognized from her own tribe. The mystery of Thomas Reed deepened with each day, but so did Alara's strength. Her body was recovering from the hardships of captivity, and with each sunrise, she felt more of her old self returning. Not the naive girl who had trusted Harrison, but the scout with eagle eyes who could read the land and its secrets. She would need that strength soon, for the child within her was growing restless, preparing for its journey into the world. And beyond the protective hills of the valley, forces were gathering that would threaten the fragile peace she had found. The doors pounding woke Alara from a fitful sleep. Rain lashed against the windows as thunder rumbled across the valley. Thomas's voice carried from downstairs, followed by a woman's desperate pleas. Wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, Alara made her way to the landing, where she could see a young woman standing in the doorway, soaked to the skin, her face bruised, one eye swollen shut. "Please," the woman begged. "They said a man at Hope Valley helps those who've been beaten, that he doesn't ask questions." Thomas glanced up, seeing Alara on the stairs. Their eyes met briefly before he turned back to the stranger. "Come in out of the rain. You're safe here." The woman staggered inside, collapsing into a chair by the fire. Alara descended the stairs, instinctively moving to help. Up close, she could see that beneath the mud and bruises, the woman was in her mid-20s with auburn hair and the refined hands of someone unaccustomed to hard labor. "I'm Clara," the woman said as Alara brought her a towel. "Clara Foster." Thomas busied himself preparing hot tea while Alara gently cleaned Clara's face, revealing the full extent of her injuries. Not just the black eye, but finger marks around her throat and wrist abrasions that spoke of restraints. "Who did this to you?" Thomas asked quietly, setting down the tea. Clara's hands trembled as she took the cup. "My husband, William Sullivan, the local judge." Her voice cracked. "He keeps me locked in the cellar when he drinks. Says a judge's wife shouldn't embarrass him by being seen with corrections, as he calls these." She gestured to her bruises. "How did you find this place?" Alara asked, suspicion edging her voice. Clara looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "An older Apache woman in town. She said if I could make it to Hope Valley, I'd find safety with the man who helps the Forsaken Ones." Alara and Thomas exchanged glances. An Apache woman? Could it have been Najoni? "You're safe now," Thomas assured Clara. "You can stay as long as you need." As Alara helped Clara to the spare bedroom, she couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Clara seemed genuinely terrified and injured, but there was something in the way she had studied Thomas, a curiosity that went beyond gratitude. When Alara returned downstairs, Thomas was staring into the fire, lost in thought. You don't find it strange? Alara asked. A judge's wife appears on your doorstep, sent by an Apache woman? Strange things happen in strange times, he replied. And these are strange times indeed. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. The storm's picking up. You should rest while you can. As if in response, a contraction rippled through Alara's body. Mild, but unmistakable. The baby would not wait much longer. The storm raged through the night and into the next day. Alara spent the hours watching Clara, noting how the woman seemed to know too much about Thomas. The way she asked about his past in the army, his connections to the Apache, his work helping people escape. Each question seemed casual, but together they formed a pattern that set Alara's instincts on alert. By afternoon, the contractions were coming more regularly. Alara said nothing, determined to handle the birth herself if necessary. She had assisted at many births in the tribe. She knew what to do. But as evening fell, a particularly strong contraction doubled her over as she was helping prepare dinner. Clara was at her side instantly. How long has this been happening? She asked, helping Alara to a chair. Since last night, Alara admitted through clenched teeth. Clara called for Thomas, who rushed in from the barn. His face paled when he saw Alara's condition. Why didn't you say something? Alara couldn't answer as another contraction seized her. Clara took charge, directing Thomas to prepare hot water and clean linens. Together they helped Alara upstairs to her bedroom. As darkness fell completely, the storm reached its peak. Lightning split the sky like the end of days, thunder shaking the house to its foundations. Rain pounded against the windows as Alara fought through wave after wave of pain. Clara checked her progress, then stepped back, her face troubled. The baby is breech, she announced. It's turned the wrong way. What does that mean? Thomas asked, alarm clear in his voice. It means we need help, Clara replied. I don't know what to do. Thunder crashed overhead as Alara grabbed Thomas's hand, her eyes fierce despite the pain. I know what to do, she gasped, but I'll need your help. Both of you. Thomas hesitated, then went to a trunk at the foot of the bed. He opened it to reveal a worn medical kit. I was a field medic before joining the cavalry, he explained, seeing their surprised expressions. Not a doctor, but I've delivered babies before. For the next several hours, Alara fought the hardest battle of her life. The pain was beyond anything she had imagined, but she refused to surrender to it. Thomas remained steady at her side, following her instructions, while Clara supported her back and wiped the sweat from her brow. In a moment of clarity between contractions, Alara gripped Thomas's hand with surprising strength. If you must choose, she whispered, save my child. Thomas's eyes locked with hers. I won't have to choose. You're both going to live. As midnight approached, Alara gathered her remaining strength for a final push. With a cry that matched the thunder outside, she brought her son into the world. The sound of his first wail filled the room, stronger than the storm, a declaration of life in the face of all that had tried to prevent it. Thomas cleared the baby's airway and wrapped him in a clean blanket before placing him on Alara's chest. The tiny boy's cries softened as he felt his mother's warmth. His small fingers wrapped around a strand of her dark hair. My son, Alara whispered, tears streaming down her face. My river. In that moment, exhausted and vulnerable, Alara looked up to find Thomas watching them with an expression of pure wonder. Not because the child was his, but because he recognized the sacred nature of what he had witnessed. A life that many had tried to extinguish had instead blazed into existence, defiant and beautiful. Clara stood in the corner, her expression complex. Relief mixed with something that looked almost like guilt as she watched Thomas gently support Alara's shoulder. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the bedroom a profound peace had descended, the peace that comes only in the presence of miracles. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having washed the world clean. Alara woke to find River sleeping peacefully beside her, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. For the first time since her banishment, she allowed herself to feel hope, not just determination to survive, but actual hope for a future worth living. Thomas knocked softly before entering with a tray of food. How are you feeling? He asked, his voice gentle. Alive, Alara replied simply. Truly alive. He smiled, setting the tray beside her, He's a strong boy, like his mother. Alara studied Thomas's face, searching for any sign of the disgust or contempt she had come to expect from men when they looked at her half-white child. She found none, only a genuine warmth that confused her. "Why did you really buy my freedom, Thomas Reed?" she asked directly. "What debt are you trying to pay?" Thomas sat in the chair beside her bed, his shoulders slumping slightly, as if under an invisible weight. For a long moment he was silent. Then, "I was a soldier once," he began, "served under Colonel Custer. We, we did unforgivable things to your people." The admission hung in the air between them. Alara had suspected as much, but hearing him say it made her instinctively pull River closer. "There was a raid on an Apache village," Thomas continued, his voice hollow. "I was ordered to clear a lodge. Inside was a woman about to give birth. She looked at me not with hate, but with pity. Pity for what I had become." His voice broke. "I couldn't save her or her child, but I swore that day that I would spend the rest of my life trying to balance the scales, trying to save those I could." Alara's throat tightened. "My father taught that hatred is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. He said we must learn forgiveness, even when it seems impossible." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Alara said, the pain of her father's rejection still fresh, until fear poisoned his wisdom. Thomas looked at River, sleeping peacefully. "What will you call him?" Alara touched her son's cheek gently. "River," she said softly, "because water flows around the stones and still finds its way." Thomas nodded, understanding the deeper meaning of her choice, that her son would navigate a world of obstacles and still carve his own path. From the doorway, Clara watched their exchange, her expression troubled. When Thomas left to tend to the animals, she approached Alara's bedside. "He's a good man," she said, looking after Thomas. "Better than most." "Yes," Alara agreed cautiously, "which makes me wonder why you watch him like a hawk studying its prey." Clara flinched, then composed herself. "We all have our reasons for being careful. You should understand that better than most." Before Alara could press further, River began to fuss. As she turned her attention to her son, Clara slipped from the room, leaving Alara with the distinct impression that Thomas Reed was not the only one in the house with secrets. A week after River's birth, Thomas returned from town with troubling news. Clara's husband, Judge Sullivan, had posted a reward for information leading to his wife's return and the Apache kidnapper who coerced her. "He claims you bewitched Clara into leaving him," Thomas explained as they sat around the kitchen table. "Says he'll see you hanged for it." Clara's face drained of color. "He won't stop," she whispered. "He can't accept that anyone would leave him. His pride won't allow it." "We've survived worse," Thomas said firmly. "This is still my land. He has no authority here without proof of wrongdoing." But Alara had noticed strangers on horseback watching the ranch from distant ridgelines over the past few days. "They're already watching us," she said. "It's only a matter of time before they make their move." Thomas's expression hardened. "Then we'll be ready." He went to a cabinet and removed a rifle, checking its mechanism. "Clara, Alara, both of you should know how to use this. I hope we never need it, but hope isn't a strategy." As Thomas taught them to load and aim the weapon, Alara noticed how Clara asked pointed questions about his schedule and habits, particularly his monthly trips into the mountains. Each question seemed innocent enough, but together they formed a pattern that made Alara increasingly suspicious. That night, unable to sleep, Alara crept downstairs for water. A faint light from beneath the door of Thomas's study caught her attention. Silently, she approached, peering through the keyhole. Clara sat at Thomas's desk, rifling through his papers by candlelight, making notes in a small journal. Her movements were practiced and precise, not the actions of a frightened, abused wife, but of someone with purpose and training. Alara pushed the door open. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her hand gripping the small knife she now carried everywhere. Clara jumped, then quickly regained her composure. "I can explain," she said, closing the journal. "I'm sure you can," Alara replied coldly. "The question is whether it will be the truth." For a long moment they stared at each other, two women with too many secrets between them. Then Clara sighed, seeming to make a decision. "I'm a reporter from Boston," she admitted. "I'm investigating the Apache underground. a secret network helping Apaches escape from reservations where they're starving to death. Ilara's grip on her knife tightened. And Thomas? He's part of it, one of the key figures, based on my research. Clara hesitated. My brother was a soldier who went missing after writing home about war crimes against natives. I'm trying to find the truth about what happened to him and about what's happening on the reservations. So you lied about being abused? Ilara asked, disgust evident in her voice. No, Clara said quickly. William Sullivan is my husband, and everything I said about him is true. I married him to get information about judicial corruption regarding native land seizures. When he discovered some of my notes, he reacted as you saw. My escape was genuine, but finding Thomas was my goal all along. Ilara processed this information, her mind working quickly. Does Thomas know who you really are? No, and he can't know, not yet. Clara's eyes were pleading. I have to understand what he's doing first. This could be the story that exposes the government's treatment of the Apache to the entire nation. It could save thousands of lives. Or it could destroy the underground network and doom those same thousands, Ilara countered. How do I know you won't betray us for your story? Clara had no answer to that. Finally, she said, You don't, but I'm asking you to wait before telling Thomas. Let me prove my intentions are good. Ilara studied the woman before her, weighing her words against her actions. At length, she said, I'll give you time, but not much. If I sense any threat to Thomas or my son, I will stop you. She left the threat purposely vague, but the steel in her voice made its meaning clear. Later, as they hung laundry together while Thomas tended the livestock, Ilara decided to probe further. Your brother, she began casually, he served with Harrison? Clara's hands stilled on the wet cloth. Yes, under him, actually. James was a lieutenant in Harrison's company. And that's why you're so interested in the underground? Because of your brother? Partly, Clara admitted, her voice dropping. But there's more. Harrison he wasn't born cruel, Ilara. Something changed in him. James wrote about it in his letters. Said Harrison once saved an Apache family, against orders. Then something happened, something James wouldn't specify, and Harrison became the monster he is now. You sound as though you knew him personally, Ilara observed. Clara's eyes met hers, then darted away. We all have pasts we'd rather not discuss, even you. She hung the last garment with unusual force. What matters is what we choose now, today. The deflection was skillful, but it confirmed Ilara's suspicion. Clara Foster and Captain Harrison shared history she was deliberately concealing. As Ilara returned to her room, cradling River close, she looked out the window to where Thomas sat on the porch, keeping his solitary vigil against the night. The mystery of this man deepened with each passing day. A former soldier who now risked everything to help the very people he once fought against. A man who had bought her freedom but asked nothing in return. A man who had delivered her son with gentle hands that had once held weapons against her people. In the quiet darkness, Ilara made her own silent vow. To protect this fragile peace she had found, this unlikely sanctuary in a world that had shown her little mercy. Whatever secrets Thomas Reed held, whatever Clara's true intentions might be, Ilara would let nothing threaten the new life beginning to take root in this valley of second chances. The medallion around Thomas's neck glinted in the moonlight, its Apache designs familiar, yet just beyond her memory's reach. One more mystery in a house full of them, waiting for the light of truth to illuminate the shadows of the past. The days following River's birth settled into a cautious rhythm at Hope Valley. Ilara's strength returned remarkably fast, a fact Thomas attributed to her warrior spirit. Each morning she would take River to sit on the eastern porch, letting the rising sun touch his face while she sang soft Apache lullabies. These quiet moments were sacred to her, a way of connecting her son to the heritage that had rejected them both. Clara maintained her charade as an abused wife, but Ilara watched her with hawkish intensity. The reporter continued to ask probing questions, though more carefully now, aware that Ilara had become her silent overseer. For his part, Thomas seemed oblivious to the tension between the women, preoccupied with strengthening the ranch's defenses against the threat of Sullivan. It was during the third week after River's birth that Ilara discovered the hidden cellar. She had been hanging laundry behind the barn when River began to fuss. Setting down her basket, she walked toward a small outbuilding to nurse him in the shade. As she stepped inside, her foot caught on a loose floorboard. Balancing River in one arm, she knelt to examine it and noticed the faint outline of a trap door. Curiosity overcame caution. After ensuring no one was watching, Alara shifted the floorboard aside to reveal a ladder descending into darkness. With River secured against her chest, she carefully made her way down, feeling for each rung with her foot. The underground room was larger than she expected, illuminated by thin beams of light filtering through concealed air vents. What she found made her breath catch. Bedrolls arranged for at least 10 people, stores of food and medicine, clean water, and most telling of all, a detailed map showing routes north marked with Apache symbols for safe houses. This was no ordinary route cellar. This was a way station for escaping Apaches, proof that Thomas was indeed part of the Apache underground Clara had mentioned. Alara quickly climbed back up, replacing the floorboard just as she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to see Thomas standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You found it," he said simply. Not a question. Alara straightened, lifting her chin. "Yes." They regarded each other for a long moment, the weight of unspoken questions hanging between them. Finally, Thomas sighed. "I suppose you deserve to know the truth," he said, gesturing for her to follow him. "But not here." They walked in silence to the massive oak tree where the solitary grave stood. Thomas knelt beside the marker, brushing leaves from its surface before speaking. "Her name was Sarah," he said quietly. "My wife. She died helping a family of Apaches escape north." Alara shifted River to her other arm, watching Thomas carefully. "What happened?" "Bounty hunters caught up to them. Sarah created a diversion so the family could escape." His voice grew thick with emotion. "She was 8 months pregnant with our first child." The significance of this revelation struck Alara like a physical blow. No wonder he had been so determined to save her at the market. She was a mirror of his lost wife. "After I buried her, I swore I would continue what we started," Thomas continued. "The underground has saved hundreds of lives over the past 5 years." "Why risk everything for people who were once your enemies?" Alara asked, genuinely puzzled. Thomas was silent for a moment, his fingers tracing the carved letters on the gravestone. "Because I learned they never were my enemies," he finally said. "They were just people trying to survive, same as anyone else." A bird called from the branches above, its song sharp and clear in the stillness. "There's more," Thomas said, reaching for the medallion he always wore. "This belonged to a woman named Hannah. She saved my life when I was wounded in battle, an Apache healer who treated a soldier who had been killing her people." He unclasped the necklace, holding it out to Alara. "She gave me half and kept half for herself. Said as long as these two pieces existed, there was hope for peace between our peoples." Alara took the medallion, turning it over in her hand. The design suddenly clicked into place in her memory. The specific pattern of her father's clan, used only by those of the tribal leader's bloodline. "This is the mark of my father's family," she whispered, looking up at Thomas with wide eyes. "Where did she say she was from?" "This Hannah." Thomas named a location that made Alara's knees weak. It was her village, her people. "Hannah was my father's sister," she said, voice barely audible. "She disappeared during a raid 15 years ago. We thought she was dead." Thomas stared at her, shock evident on his weathered face. "She survived. She's the one who started the underground. And she—" He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "She asked me to find you when we heard you'd been cast out. I'd been searching for months before I found you at that market." The world seemed to tilt beneath Alara's feet. She sat heavily on a nearby rock, cradling River close as she processed this information. "My aunt is alive," she murmured, tears filling her eyes. "And she sent you to find me." "Yes," Thomas knelt before her. "Hannah is alive, Alara. She's been living in seclusion in the mountains of DMM1s, the place I visit each month. She was badly injured in that raid, and her appearance would make her instantly recognizable to authorities. So she remains hidden, directing the underground from the shadows." 1,000 emotions warred within Alara: joy that her beloved aunt lived, anger at being kept in the dark, and a growing sense that fate had drawn her to this valley for a purpose greater than mere survival. "I need to see her," Alara said firmly. Thomas nodded. When you're strong enough for the journey, it's not an easy trail. As they walked back toward the house, Alara's mind raced with questions. Does Clara know about any of this? Thomas looked at her sharply. Clara? No, why would she? Alara made a split-second decision to keep Clara's secret for now. No reason, she said, just wondering how many others know about the underground. Very few, Thomas replied, and it needs to stay that way. Unspoken between them was the knowledge that Judge Sullivan's hunt for Clara provided the perfect cover for his true target, exposing and destroying the Apache underground. That evening, a weathered old trader named Joseph arrived at the ranch. Alara observed from the kitchen window as he and Thomas exchanged what appeared to be casual conversation about the weather and cattle prices. But she caught the subtle hand signals between them, Apache signs that she recognized from her childhood. They were speaking in code right under Clara's watchful eyes. When Joseph departed, he left behind a wagon load of supplies that Thomas immediately moved to the barn. After dinner, when Clara had retired to her room, Alara confronted him. How many? She asked simply. Thomas didn't pretend to misunderstand. 8, a family with children. They escaped the reservation after the army cut their rations again. The youngest is sick with fever. When? Tomorrow night. They'll need the cellar for at least 3 days before the next guide can take them north. Alara nodded, decision made. I'll help prepare. The mother will be frightened for her children. A friendly face, someone who speaks their language, will help. Thomas studied her for a long moment. Are you sure this puts you at risk too? I've been at risk since the day I was born Apache, Alara replied with a hint of her old fire. At least this risk has meaning. Later that night, as she nursed River by candlelight, Alara heard the soft creak of footsteps in the hallway. Clara's shadow paused outside her door before moving on toward the stairs. Following her instincts, Alara placed River in his cradle and silently tracked the other woman through the darkened house. Clara slipped outside, moving purposefully toward the barn where Thomas had stored the supplies. Alara followed at a distance, her feet remembering the silent walk of a hunter. She watched as Clara examined the wagon, then carefully pried open one of the crates. Inside were not the household goods they appeared to be, but medical supplies, children's clothing, and packets of food. The reporter pulled a small notebook from her pocket and began writing by moonlight. Alara stepped from the shadows. Finding what you're looking for? She asked coldly. Clara jumped, nearly dropping her notebook. I'm just gathering evidence for your story, Alara finished for her. The great expose on the Apache underground that will make your career in Boston. Clara's face hardened. You don't understand what's at stake. I understand better than anyone, Alara countered, stepping closer. Those supplies are for children who are starving because your government would rather see them dead than feed them. If you expose the underground, you condemn not just Thomas, but hundreds of my people. Or I could save thousands by forcing the government to face what it's doing, Clara replied, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. When has shame ever stopped men of power? Alara asked bitterly. They will hang Thomas, imprison the others, and continue their slaughter with clearer consciences for having punished the lawbreakers. Clara's shoulders slumped slightly. Then what would you have me do? Ignore what I've seen? Pretend I don't know the truth? I would have you see the whole truth before you decide, Alara said, her voice softening. Tomorrow night, 8 people will arrive here, exhausted, starving, and afraid. Watch their faces, listen to their stories, then decide if your story is worth their lives. She turned to leave, then paused. And if you betray us, if you endanger my son or the people Thomas is trying to save, I will ensure your husband finds you before Thomas can stop me. The threat hung in the night air between them, its weight made heavier by the certainty that Alara meant every word. The refugees arrived after midnight the following night, a father, mother, grandmother, and 5 children, ranging from infancy to about 10 years old. They came on foot, having walked for days to reach the rendezvous point where Joseph had found them. Alara's heart ached at the sight of their emaciated frames and the fear in their hollow eyes. The youngest child, a girl no more than 2, burned with fever in her mother's arms. They spoke a dialect different from Alara's, but similar enough that she could communicate basic reassurances as she helped them into the hidden cellar. Clara watched from the shadows of the barn, her reporter's objectivity crumbling in the face of such obvious suffering. When the youngest child began coughing violently, she stepped forward with a blanket and a container of cool water. "I was a nurse during the war," she said to Thomas. "Let me help." For the rest of the night, Clara worked alongside Alara and Thomas, bathing the feverish child, preparing food, and making the refugees as comfortable as possible in their underground sanctuary. By dawn, the child's fever had broken, and the family had fallen into exhausted sleep. As Clara helped tend to the feverish Apache child, Alara noticed her pause beside Thomas's desk, her attention caught by a small silver compass lying open among his papers. The initials JH were engraved on its surface. "That's Harrison's," Thomas explained, following Clara's gaze. "Taken from him during a skirmish 2 years ago. I keep it as a reminder." Clara's fingers hovered over the object, her expression unreadable. "May I?" When Thomas nodded, she picked it up, turning it over with a familiarity that suggested she'd seen it before. "This design is distinctive. Military issue for officers of his rank," Thomas said. "Wait." Clara set it down carefully, perhaps too carefully. "Just curious about the enemy," she replied, but Alara noted the slight tremor in her hands as she returned to the child's bedside. As they climbed back up to the main level of the barn, Clara's face was drawn and thoughtful. "I had read reports about conditions on the reservations," she said quietly. "But seeing it, reports don't show you the hollow eyes of a child who's been hungry so long they've forgotten what it feels like to be full," Thomas replied. "Numbers on a page don't convey the sound a mother makes when she can't feed her baby." Clara nodded, her reporter's detachment visibly crumbling. "My brother wrote to me about what he saw. That's why I started investigating. He said it was a slow murder disguised as policy." "Your brother was right," Alara said. She had been watching Clara closely, weighing her sincerity. "What was his name?" "Lieutenant James Foster, 7th Cavalry," Clara replied. "He disappeared 3 years ago after writing letters to our father about atrocities he'd witnessed." Thomas went completely still. "James Foster," he repeated. "Tall man, red hair like yours, scar on his right hand." Clara's eyes widened. "You knew him?" "He was one of us," Thomas said softly, "part of the underground. He helped dozens of families escape before he disappeared. We always suspected he was discovered." Clara pressed a hand to her mouth. "Then he really did try to help. I knew it." Tears filled her eyes. "I've spent 3 years trying to find the truth about what happened to him." Alara watched this exchange with growing understanding. Clara's deception came not from malice, but from desperation to find answers about her brother. The realization softened her hostility toward the reporter, if only slightly. "If your brother was part of the underground," Alara said carefully, "then exposing it would dishonor everything he risked his life for." Clara looked between them, conflict clear on her face. "I need time to think," she finally said. "But for now, my story stays in my notebook. You have my word. It wasn't a complete surrender, but it was a start." As Clara walked back to the house, Thomas turned to Alara with raised eyebrows. "You knew she was a reporter?" he asked. Alara nodded. "I caught her searching your study a few days ago. She admitted the truth then." "And you didn't tell me?" His tone held more curiosity than accusation. "I wanted to understand her intentions first," Alara explained. "And now I think I do. She's searching for her brother, just as I've been searching for my place in this world." Thomas's weathered face softened. "You've changed since you arrived here. The woman I found at that market would never have shown compassion to someone she'd know as a threat." Alara glanced toward the house where River slept peacefully. "Motherhood changes a woman, so does finding people worth trusting." Something shifted in Thomas's expression, a warmth that went beyond mere friendship. For a moment neither spoke, the connection between them deepening in the silence. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Thomas moved instantly to the barn door, rifle in hand. A group of riders was approaching from the east. 5 men, led by a figure in an army uniform. "Get inside," Thomas ordered. "Wake Clara and take River to the cellar. Use the escape tunnel if you hear shooting." "I won't leave you to face them alone," Alara protested. "You must." His blue eyes held hers intently. "Those children downstairs need you more than I do." Unable to argue with that logic, Alara hurried to the house. She quickly roused Clara and retrieved River from his cradle. Together, they made their way to the hidden cellar, where the refugee family woke in alarm at their arrival. "Soldiers," Alara explained in their dialect. "Stay quiet. We are safe here." From their hiding place, they could hear muffled voices above. Thomas's steady tones countered by a sharper, more authoritative voice. The conversation continued for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes before the sound of retreating hoofbeats signaled the visitor's departure. Footsteps approached the trapdoor, and Thomas's voice called down softly. "It's clear." When they emerged, his face was grim. "Captain Harrison," he said to Alara. "He's searching for a renegade Apache woman and her half-breed child. Claims you stole Army property and need to be returned." Alara's blood ran cold. Harrison, River's father, was hunting them. "What did you tell him?" "That I haven't seen any Apache woman except the old ones that sometimes come begging," Thomas replied. "He didn't believe me, but he has no authority to search private property without evidence. He's heading to town to speak with the local judge." "Sullivan," Clara whispered, face paling. "My husband. They're working together." Alara caught something else in Clara's expression when Harrison's name was mentioned. Not just fear, but a flicker of recognition that went deeper than merely knowing of the captain by reputation. For a moment, Clara's hand moved unconsciously to touch a small pendant at her throat before quickly dropping away. "You know Harrison?" Alara asked sharply. Clara's composure returned almost instantly. "Only by reputation. The captain's cruelty toward natives is well known even in Boston circles." The explanation seemed reasonable, but Alara noted how Clara's fingers twisted nervously at her skirt, a tell she'd never shown before. "Then we have a day, at most, before they return with a warrant," Thomas said. "We need to move the family tonight, and—" He hesitated, looking at Alara. "You and River should go too. Hannah can keep you safe until this passes." The thought of leaving the valley filled Alara with unexpected sorrow. In just a few short weeks, this place had become more of a home than the tribe had been in the final years before her banishment. "And you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I'll stay and deal with Harrison," Thomas replied. "If he finds the cellar empty, he'll have no proof of anything." Clara stepped forward, determination replacing her earlier uncertainty. "I can help. Sullivan doesn't know I'm here. If I return to him, claiming I was lost or kidnapped by Indians, as he believes, I can monitor their plans." "That's too dangerous," Thomas objected. "Sullivan will—" "He won't kill me," Claire interrupted. "He needs me alive to maintain his reputation. I can do this. Let me help, for my brother's sake." Thomas and Alara exchanged looks, silently weighing the risks. Finally, Thomas nodded. "Be careful. At the first sign of real danger, get word to us and then run." As preparations began for the night's journey, Alara found herself drawn to the solitary grave beneath the oak tree. Sarah Reed had died protecting Apaches, just as Thomas now risked his life to protect Alara and her son. The parallels were impossible to ignore. She knelt beside the grave, River cradled against her chest. "I don't know if spirits can hear across the divide," she murmured. "But if you can hear me, know that your sacrifice was not in vain. Your husband carries forward your compassion. He saved us when no one else would." A gentle breeze stirred the oak's leaves, sending dappled sunlight dancing across the grave marker. Alara felt a sense of peace settle over her, not completion, but a step toward healing the wounds of her past. That evening, as Thomas helped load supplies for their journey, Alara noticed him wince when lifting a heavy crate. Without comment, he continued working, but a dark stain soon spread across the back of his shirt. "You're bleeding," she said, stopping him with a hand on his arm. Thomas shrugged dismissively. "Old wound, opens up sometimes when I work too hard." "Let me see it," Alara insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, Thomas removed his shirt. Alara drew in a sharp breath at the sight of the massive scar that ran from his right shoulder across his back, the mark of a cavalry saber she recognized, and a wound that should have been fatal. "Hannah's handiwork," Thomas explained, seeing her expression. "She found me half dead after a skirmish, dragged me to her camp, and spent 3 days pulling me back from the edge of death. By all rights, I should have died on that battlefield." Alara's fingers hovered over the scar, not quite touching. "This is why you help my people. You owe her your life." "I owe her more than that," Thomas said softly. She showed me that everything I believed about the savage Apache was a lie created to make killing them easier. She gave me back my humanity when I had all but lost it. The wound was seeping blood from a spot near his shoulder blade. With practiced hands, Ilara cleaned and dressed it, applying a poultice of herbs she'd gathered from the garden. Hannah taught you her healing ways, Thomas observed. She started to before she disappeared, Ilara confirmed. I never had her gift, but I learned the basics. As she worked, her fingers traced the ridge of scar tissue. Thomas remained perfectly still, his breathing measured. When she finished, neither moved away immediately, the moment stretching between them like a thread of silver in the fading light. Thank you, Thomas finally said, his voice rougher than usual. Ilara stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they had been standing. We should finish loading the wagon, she said briskly, handing him his shirt. Night will be here soon. Dusk was settling over the valley when they heard the unexpected sound of wagon wheels on the drive. Thomas signaled for Ilara to take River and hide while he investigated, rifle in hand. To everyone's surprise, the visitor was Najoni, Ilara's stepmother. She sat ramrod straight on the wagon seat, her lined face revealing nothing as Thomas approached cautiously. I've come to see my daughter, she announced without preamble, and her child. Thomas glanced toward the house where Ilara stood in the doorway, River in her arms. After a moment's hesitation, he lowered his rifle and nodded to Najoni. That's for her to decide, Pump, he said. Ilara stepped forward, studying the woman who had sold her like cattle. Najoni had aged years in just the few months since that day. Her hair grayer, the lines in her face deeper, her proud posture undermined by a new fragility. Why are you here? Ilara demanded, keeping her distance. Najoni climbed slowly from the wagon. To warn you, Harrison knows about the child. He won't rest until he finds you both. Why would you care? Ilara's voice was sharp with old pain. You sold me to the highest bidder. I sold you to him, Najoni corrected, pointing at Thomas. Only to him. I made sure of it. Confusion crossed Ilara's face. What are you talking about? Najoni sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of her 60 years. I've been watching Thomas Reed for years. I knew he was part of the underground. I knew he would protect you. The revelation struck Ilara like a physical blow. You planned it? All of it? Not all, Najoni admitted. I couldn't prevent your banishment, but I could ensure you ended up somewhere safe, somewhere Hannah could find you. You know about Hannah? Thomas interjected, stepping closer. Najoni gave him a withering look. Of course I know. Who do you think has been guiding your lost ones to your contact points all these years? Hannah and I have worked together since the beginning. Ilara felt as though the ground beneath her feet had turned to water. The woman she had believed hated her, the woman who had publicly humiliated her at the market, had actually been working to save her life all along. Why the deception? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why not just tell me? Would you have believed me? Najoni countered. After years of bad blood between us? You needed to hate me enough to never try returning to the tribe. Your father would have killed you if you had. The harsh truth of those words settled in the gathering darkness. Ilara looked down at River, peacefully sleeping against her chest, unaware of the complexities that had shaped his very existence. Harrison and the judge are planning a raid tomorrow at dawn, Najoni continued. They have a warrant and a dozen men. You must leave tonight. Thomas nodded grimly. We were already preparing to move the family from the cellar. Ilara and River will go with them to Hannah's camp. And I'm returning to Sullivan, Clara added, stepping from the shadows of the porch, to learn what I can about their plans. Najoni's sharp eyes assessed Clara. The judge's wife. Hannah told me about you. Your brother was a brave man. Clara blinked in surprise. You knew James? I helped him when he joined the underground, Najoni confirmed. His disappearance was no accident. Sullivan discovered his activities and arranged it. The color drained from Clara's face. My husband killed my brother? Not with his own hands, but his orders, yes. Najoni's expression held no gentleness, only the hard edge of truth. Think carefully about returning to him. Clara's hands trembled, but her jaw set with determination. All the more reason to go. I need proof of what he's done. As night fell completely, final preparations were made. The refugee family was loaded into a covered wagon, hidden beneath false panels that Thomas had constructed for this purpose. Clara departed first, taking a circuitous route back to town to maintain the fiction that she had escaped her captors. Alara found herself reluctant to leave, standing beside the wagon with River bundled against the night's chill. Thomas approached, carrying a small package. As they made final preparations for departure, Clara passed Alara a small bundle of provisions. Their hands touched briefly, and Alara noticed a thin scar circling Clara's wrist, the kind left by manacles or tight restraints. Following Alara's gaze, Clara quickly pulled her sleeve down. A reminder of choices poorly made, she said quietly. Sullivan? Alara asked. Clara hesitated, something unspoken hanging in the air between them. Not all chains are placed on us by others, she finally replied. Some we forge ourselves through misplaced loyalty. The cryptic answer raised more questions, but there was no time to pursue them. Still, as they finished loading the wagon, Alara recalled something Thomas had mentioned, Harrison's reputation for binding his prisoners with distinctive wire restraints, thin enough to cut but not to break. For the journey, he said, handing it to her. Inside was food, a small knife, and a folded paper. The map to Hannah's camp in case we get separated. Their hands touched briefly, and Alara felt an unexpected surge of emotion. Thomas, she began, uncertain what she wanted to say. I know, he replied simply. Me too. Najoni watched this exchange with knowing eyes before climbing onto the wagon seat. We need to move while darkness gives us cover. Thomas helped Alara into the wagon, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. I'll join you at Hannah's camp as soon as I can, he promised. Stay safe. As the wagon pulled away from the ranch, Alara looked back at Thomas standing alone in the yard, his figure growing smaller with distance. For the first time in her life, leaving felt like tearing rather than escape. She had found something at Hope Valley she had never expected. Not just safety, but belonging. The stars emerged above them as they traveled, the same stars her ancestors had used to navigate through countless dangers. Alara held River close, drawing comfort from his steady breathing. Whatever came next, she was no longer alone. She had her son, her unexpected ally in Najoni, and the promise of reunion with the aunt she had thought lost forever. And perhaps, when this danger had passed, she might find her way back to the valley, and to the man who had shown her that some chains were meant to be broken, while other bonds could heal even the deepest wounds. The mountain trail grew steeper as dawn approached, forcing the horses to slow to a careful walk. Najoni guided them with expert hands, navigating switchbacks and narrow passages that seemed to disappear into sheer rock until you were upon them. Hannah chose well, Najoni commented as they ascended yet another seemingly impossible incline. No army patrol would ever find this place. The refugee family huddled together in the wagon bed, the children wide-eyed at the precipitous drops visible through gaps in the canvas covering. Alara kept River close, singing softly to keep him calm as the wagon jolted over rocky terrain. We're being followed, Najoni announced suddenly, her voice tight. 2 riders, keeping their distance. Alara turned to look behind them, her scout's eyes quickly picking out the movement on the trail below. Harrison, she said grimly, recognizing the distinctive blue of a cavalry uniform even at this distance. How did they find us so quickly? Najoni muttered, urging the horses faster despite the dangerous path. We have to reach the camp before they catch up. But the wagon, heavy with passengers and supplies, couldn't outpace riders on horseback. As they rounded a bend, Alara saw the trail ahead drop away into a ravine, crossed by only the narrowest of bridges, barely wide enough for their wagon. We'll never make it across before they catch us, she realized aloud. Najoni's weathered face hardened with resolve. Take River and lead the family across on foot, she ordered. I'll hold them off. With what? Alara demanded. In answer, Najoni pulled a cavalry revolver from beneath her seat. I've lived too long already, she said matter-of-factly, and I have much to atone for. Go, daughter of my heart. Give Hannah my love. The unexpected endearment struck Alara speechless. Before she could form a response, Najoni had stopped the wagon and was helping the family climb down. They hurried toward the bridge, the mother carrying her youngest while the father helped the grandmother. Alara hesitated, torn between escape and an unwillingness to leave Najoni to face Harrison alone. I can't let you sacrifice yourself for us. You can and you will, Najoni replied firmly, Your son needs his mother. Now go." The sound of approaching horses grew louder. With a final anguished look at the woman she had spent years resenting, Alara turned and ran for the bridge. River clutched tightly against her chest. Behind her, she heard Najoni's voice raised in the war cry of their tribe, a sound Alara had not heard since childhood, a call that stirred ancestral memory in her blood. A single gunshot echoed through the mountains, then another. Alara didn't look back, focused only on getting River safely across the narrow bridge that swayed alarmingly with each step. The refugee family had already reached the other side and continued up the trail, the father staying behind to wait for Alara. As her foot touched solid ground on the far side, a third shot rang out, followed by a cry of pain that wasn't Najoni's. Alara finally turned to see her stepmother still standing beside the wagon, smoking gun in hand, while one of the pursuers clutched his shoulder. The second rider, Harrison, had dismounted and was using his horse for cover as he returned fire. "Go!" Najoni shouted across the ravine, ducking behind the wagon wheel as a bullet splintered the wood near her head. "The camp is less than a mile ahead." Torn by guilt but driven by maternal instinct, Alara continued up the trail, the Apache father keeping pace beside her. Behind them, the gunfire continued, sporadic single shots that echoed between the canyon walls like thunder. Then silence fell, more terrifying than the gunshots had been. Alara wanted desperately to go back, to know Najoni's fate, but River's safety had to come first. They pushed on, climbing ever higher into the mountains until they reached a sheer rock face that appeared to be a dead end. The Apache father stepped forward, touching specific places on the rock in a pattern. To Alara's amazement, a section of stone pivoted inward, revealing a hidden passage. "Hannah teaches all who come here," the man explained in their shared dialect. "Secret ways, safe paths." They stepped through the opening, which closed seamlessly behind them. The passage led to a sheltered valley invisible from below, a natural fortress surrounded by sheer cliffs on all sides, with the only access being the hidden door they had just used. Within this protected basin stood a small village of sorts, several wooden structures, gardens of medicinal herbs, a central fire pit, and a clear spring bubbling from the rock face. People moved about with purpose, mostly Apache, but some white faces among them as well. All turned to watch the newcomers with cautious curiosity. From the largest structure emerged an elderly woman, her silver hair braided with colorful threads, her face deeply lined, but her eyes sharp and knowing. Though aged beyond what Alara remembered, there was no mistaking her. "Aunt Hannah," Alara whispered, tears filling her eyes. Hannah opened her arms and Alara stepped into them, careful not to crush River between them. The embrace held 15 years of separation, of believed death and miraculous survival. "My brother's daughter," Hannah said, her voice cracking with emotion. "At last you have found your way to us." As they separated, Hannah gently pulled back River's blanket to see his face. "The next generation," she murmured, "born of two worlds as it should be." Alara wanted to savor this reunion, but urgency pressed upon her. "Najoni," she said. She stayed behind to hold off Harrison. "We have to help her." Hannah's eyes darkened with concern. "Show me where." Leading her aunt to the edge of the basin, Alara pointed down to where the bridge crossed the ravine. Tiny figures could be seen below, one prone on the ground, one kneeling beside the wagon. Hannah studied the scene, then turned to a young Apache man nearby. "Take Swallow and Wolf," she ordered. "Bring Najoni home, alive if possible." As the rescue party departed through the hidden door, Hannah guided Alara back toward the center of the camp. "Now," she said, with the authority of a woman accustomed to being obeyed, "you will rest, eat, and tell me everything that has happened since you left the tribe." Settled inside Hannah's dwelling with River nursing contentedly, Alara recounted her story from Harrison's betrayal to her banishment, from the humiliation of the market to Thomas Reed's unexpected kindness. Hannah listened without interruption, her wise eyes taking in not just the words, but the emotions behind them. "Thomas has honored his promise to me," she said when Alara finished. "I knew he would." "What promise?" Alara asked. Hannah's weathered hand touched the half medallion hanging around her own neck, the match to Thomas's. "When I saved him from that saber wound, he was more ghost than man. During his fever, he spoke of terrible things he had done in battle, acts that haunted him. When he recovered, he begged for a way to atone. She smiled at the memory. I told him atonement isn't something given, but something earned through actions. I asked him to help our people escape the slow death of the reservations. He has been our most valuable ally ever since. And my father? Ilara asked hesitantly. Does he know you're alive? Hannah's expression grew solemn. No, it was safer for everyone if I remained dead to the tribe. Your father's pride would never have allowed him to accept my work with the white man, even to save our people. River finished nursing and dozed off in Ilara's arms. Looking down at her son's peaceful face, she felt the weight of generations, the hatred and bloodshed that had shaped their lives, the difficult path that lay ahead for a child of mixed blood in a world that demanded stark divisions. Will it ever end? She asked softly. This cycle of vengeance and retribution? Hannah's gaze turned to the doorway, where children played outside, Apache and White together, laughing in the sunshine. It already is ending, one heart at a time. Your son is proof of that. So is Thomas Reed, a soldier who learned to see his enemy as human. So are you, my niece, finding compassion where bitterness could have ruled. A commotion outside drew their attention. The rescue party had returned, supporting between them the limping figure of Najoni. Her arm was bandaged and her face drawn with pain, but she was unmistakably alive. Ilara rushed outside, relief washing over her like a cleansing rain. You survived. Najoni managed a weak smile. It takes more than one arrogant captain to kill this old woman. Her expression sobered. But Harrison escaped. He'll bring others. Hannah helped Najoni to a seat by the fire. We've survived army searches before. This place remains hidden. Not if they torture Thomas to reveal its location, Najoni countered grimly. Harrison was heading back down the mountain, toward Hope Valley. Cold dread settled in Ilara's stomach. Thomas, alone at the ranch with Harrison in pursuit, possibly blaming him for Najoni's attack and Ilara's escape. The timing didn't allow for him to have reached Hannah's camp as planned. He would be facing Harrison's rage with no warning. We have to warn him, she said, already moving toward the hidden door. Hannah caught her arm. You cannot go back, Ilara. Not with River. Harrison wants both of you. Then send someone else. By the time they reached the valley, it would be too late, Hannah said gently. Thomas knew the risks when he stayed behind. Ilara's mind raced, considering and discarding options. Finally, she turned to the Apache mother whose family they had helped escape. Would you watch over River? She asked. Just until I return? The woman's eyes reflected understanding, one mother to another. She nodded, holding out her arms to take the sleeping infant. Ilara, no, Hannah protested. This is madness. This is loyalty, Ilara countered, strapping a knife to her belt and gathering minimal supplies. Thomas risked everything for me and my son. I will not abandon him to Harrison. Najoni, despite her injury, straightened with something like pride. Give me an hour to rest, she said. Then I'm coming with you. Your wound, Ilara began, will heal or it won't, Najoni interrupted. But I won't sit safely in this mountain while you face danger alone. Not again. Hannah, recognizing the futility of further argument, sighed deeply. At least wait until nightfall, she advised. Darkness will give you some protection. Ilara nodded reluctantly, knowing the wisdom of this even as every instinct screamed for her to rush back to Hope Valley immediately. As she prepared for the journey, checking and rechecking her meager weapons, she realized with startling clarity what Thomas Reed had come to mean to her. He wasn't just her rescuer or River's protector. Somewhere in the quiet moments of shared meals and gentle conversations, in his respect for her strength and his understanding of her pain, Thomas had become essential to her future, a future she had only recently allowed herself to imagine. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Ilara gazed down at River, peaceful in the Apache mother's arms. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, inhaling his sweet scent to carry with her. I will return, she whispered, a promise to her son and to herself. Then, with Najoni at her side, she stepped through the hidden door and back into danger, guided by the unshakable certainty that Thomas Reed needed her as much as she had once needed him. Hope Valley waited below, and with it, a confrontation that would determine not just their fate, but the future of the underground and all those it protected. As darkness settled over the mountains, Ilara and Najoni began their descent. Two women bound by newly discovered loyalty, moving like shadows through a world that had given them every reason to despair, but had somehow led them instead to courage. Behind them, Hannah stood watching until they disappeared from sight, her aged fingers clutching the half-medallion that symbolized the bridge between worlds, a bridge that her niece was now crossing in both directions, bringing with her the possibility of a new understanding between old enemies. The first stars appeared overhead, ancient lights that had witnessed countless human struggles. They would witness this one too, the battle not just for survival, but for a vision of the future where hatred gave way to healing, and where hope took root in the most unlikely of valleys. The descent from Hannah's mountain sanctuary proved more treacherous in darkness than Alara had anticipated. Each step required careful consideration, the narrow trail barely visible in the weak moonlight filtering through scattered clouds. Beside her, Najoni moved with the determined patience of a woman who had survived decades of hardship, her injured arm held close to her body. Harrison will have reached the valley by now, Najoni said as they paused to catch their breath on a small ledge. If Thomas was still at the ranch, she left the sentence unfinished, but Alara's mind filled with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. Thomas facing armed men alone. Thomas being tortured for information about the underground. Thomas lying dead in the home he had made into a sanctuary for others. "We'll reach the valley before dawn," Alara replied, refusing to entertain the worst scenarios. "Thomas is smart. He wouldn't stay to be captured." "Men do foolish things when protecting what they love," Najoni observed, her shrewd eyes studying Alara's face in the dim light. Love. The word hung in the air between them. Was that what had grown between her and Thomas? This feeling that made her leave the safety of Hannah's camp, leave even her newborn son, to rush back toward danger? "We should keep moving," Alara said instead of answering, adjusting the small pack on her back. The knife at her waist and another in her boot were her only weapons, insufficient against army revolvers, but better than nothing. They continued downward, every sense alert for signs of pursuit or danger. As the trail widened near the foot of the mountain, Alara suddenly raised her hand in warning. Najoni froze mid-step. "Horses," Alara whispered, her scout's ears catching the distant sound of hoofbeats. Many of them. They melted into the shadows of a rocky outcropping, pressing their bodies against cold stone as a group of riders passed below. Soldiers, at least 8 of them, led by a figure Alara recognized instantly despite the darkness. Captain Harrison sat tall in his saddle, moonlight gleaming off his golden hair. Even from a distance, his arrogant posture made her stomach twist with remembered betrayal. "Heading toward Hannah's camp," Najoni whispered once the riders had passed. "But they'll never find the entrance." "Unless they captured Thomas and forced him to reveal it," Alara countered, anxiety sharpening her tone. "Thomas Reed would die before betraying the underground," Najoni said with certainty. That was precisely what Alara feared. As the eastern sky began to lighten with pre-dawn gray, Hope Valley came into view below them. From their vantage point on the hillside, they could see Thomas's ranch, the 2-story house, the barn, the stables. No movement was visible. No smoke rose from the chimney. The stillness felt unnatural, ominous. "Something's wrong," Alara murmured. "There should be activity by now. Thomas always starts chores before sunrise." "We need to get closer," Najoni agreed, "but carefully. Harrison may have left men behind." They worked their way down through the scrub brush, using every natural feature for cover. As they neared the edge of the property, Alara's sharp eyes caught a flash of metal near the barn, sunlight reflecting off a rifle barrel. Someone was watching the house. With hand signals she'd learned as a tribal scout, Alara directed Najoni to circle around behind the barn while she approached from the side. Moving from shadow to shadow with practiced stealth, Alara drew close enough to identify the watcher. A young soldier, barely more than a boy, nervously clutching his rifle as he maintained his vigil. A distraction was needed. Picking up a stone, Alara threw it hard toward the far side of the property. It clattered loudly against the water trough, causing the young soldier to spin toward the noise, rifle raised. In that moment of distraction, Najoni emerged from behind the barn and struck him with a piece of firewood. He collapsed without a sound. Alara rushed forward, quickly checking to ensure he was merely unconscious, not dead. They dragged him inside the barn and bound him with rope, gagging him to prevent any alarm. One guard seems insufficient if they captured Thomas, Najoni observed as they surveyed the silent ranch house from the barn door. Unless he's not here, Alara said, hope flaring briefly. Maybe he escaped before Harrison arrived. Or they took him with them to the mountains. They needed to know for certain. After checking that no other guards were visible, they made their way to the house, approaching from the blind side away from the front door. Alara tried the back entrance, unlocked, which was typical of Thomas but unusual if soldiers had secured the property. The kitchen was cold, the hearth containing only gray ashes. No sign of struggle was immediately visible, but the feeling of wrongness intensified as they moved through the silent rooms. In Thomas's study, Alara found the first evidence of disruption. Drawers pulled open, papers scattered, the desk clearly searched. They were looking for something specific, Najoni said, examining the selective nature of the disturbance. Maps to the underground stations, perhaps. A faint sound from upstairs halted their investigation, a creak of floorboards, too deliberate to be random settling of the house. Someone else was there. Alara drew her knife while Najoni positioned herself beside the staircase, ready to ambush anyone coming down. The sound came again, followed by a thump and a muffled groan. Human, definitely, and in pain. "Thomas?" Alara called softly, hope and fear battling in her chest. Silence. Then another groan, louder this time, coming from her bedroom at the end of the hallway. Keeping her knife ready, Alara ascended the stairs, testing each step carefully to avoid creaks that might alert a potential ambush. Najoni followed, watching their backs. At the top of the stairs, Alara paused, listening intently. The house remained silent except for the faint sounds of labored breathing coming from behind her bedroom door. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open, knife raised, and nearly dropped it in shock at the sight that greeted her. Thomas lay on her bed, shirt soaked with blood, hands and feet bound to the bedposts. His face was barely recognizable through bruising and swelling, one eye completely shut, but the other opened at her entrance, widening in alarm rather than relief. "Run," he croaked through split lips. "Trap." Too late, Alara sensed movement behind her. Something hard struck the back of her head, sending her sprawling forward as darkness edged her vision. She fought to stay conscious, aware of Najoni struggling with someone in the hallway, of boots entering her field of view as she lay stunned on the floor. "Well, well," said a coldly familiar voice. "The savage whore returns." And with another one, no less. Harrison. Alara forced her head up, fighting through the pain to glare at the man who had fathered her child, only to abandon them both. "Where is it?" he demanded, crouching to bring his face level with hers. His handsome features were twisted with cruelty, blue eyes cold as winter sky. "Where is the half-breed bastard?" Alara spat in his face, earning herself a backhanded slap that sent fresh pain exploding through her skull. Through ringing ears, she heard Najoni being dragged into the room, cursing in Apache as two soldiers forced her to her knees. "Your mother has spirit," Harrison commented, wiping his face with a handkerchief. "Is that what attracted you, Reed? A taste for wild women?" Thomas strained against his bonds, fresh blood seeping from reopened wounds. "Leave them out of this," he growled. "Your quarrel is with me." Harrison laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "My quarrel is with anyone harboring fugitives and Indian lovers." He turned back to Alara. "Last chance, where is the child?" "Safe from you," Alara replied, finding strength in the certainty that River was protected in Hannah's mountain sanctuary. "You'll never find him." Something dangerous flashed in Harrison's eyes. "We'll see about that." He gestured to his men. "Secure them. Judge Sullivan is eager to begin the proceedings." As rough hands pulled Alara to her feet and bound her wrists, her mind raced. Proceedings? Were they to have some mockery of a trial before Harrison killed them? And what of Clara? Had she maintained her cover with Sullivan? Or had she too been exposed? The soldiers marched them downstairs and out to waiting horses. Thomas could barely stand, requiring two men to heave him onto a mount. Alara caught his eye briefly as they were positioned in the small procession, a look that conveyed both apology and determination. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The journey to town took an hour, during which Alara observed as much as possible about their captors, seeking weaknesses or opportunities. Harrison rode at the front, spine straight as a ramrod, every inch the proud cavalry officer. The 6 soldiers accompanying them were a mix of veterans and young recruits, all watching their native prisoners with varying degrees of suspicion and contempt. The town of Redemption Creek had grown since Alara's last visit, new buildings sprouting along the main street, giving it a more established feel than the rough frontier outpost it had been a few years earlier. People stopped to stare as the procession passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility at the sight of Apache prisoners. They were taken to a large brick building that served as both courthouse and jail. Inside, the main courtroom was already filling with spectators, ranchers, shopkeepers, and townspeople eager for the spectacle of judgment. At the judge's bench sat William Sullivan, his imposing figure augmented by the black robes of his office. His cold eyes showed no recognition as they fell on Alara, but a muscle twitched in his jaw when Najoni was brought in. And beside him, to Alara's shock, stood Clara, hair neatly arranged, wearing a fine dress appropriate to her position as the judge's wife. Her face was an expressionless mask, but a slight widening of her eyes communicated silent warning as Alara and the others were brought before the bench. "The court will come to order," Sullivan announced, his deep voice silencing the murmuring crowd. "We are convened for an emergency session to address crimes of the most serious nature. Before us stand 3 individuals accused of treason, sedition, kidnapping, assault on military personnel, and harboring fugitives from justice." He fixed his cold gaze on Thomas. "Thomas Reed, once a decorated soldier of these United States, you stand accused of betraying your country by assisting hostile Indians in escaping lawful confinement. How do you plead?" Thomas, barely able to stand between his 2 guards, raised his head with dignity. "If feeding starving children and healing the sick is treason, then I am guilty." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sullivan's gavel cracked down for silence. "You admit your guilt, then?" "I admit to acting according to my conscience," Thomas replied steadily, "which is more than can be said for many in this room." Sullivan's face darkened. "Your conscience has led you to consort with savages against your own kind. Captain Harrison has provided evidence of your activities harboring renegade Apaches, including this woman." He gestured contemptuously at Alara, "a known collaborator with hostiles." Alara's anger flared. "The only hostile here is Harrison, who abandoned his own child when it proved inconvenient to his ambitions." Gasps and shocked whispers erupted from the spectators. Harrison stepped forward, face flushed with rage. "The savage lies. I demand she be silenced." "Order!" Sullivan's gavel pounded repeatedly until quiet returned. "Such outbursts will not be tolerated. The prisoners will speak only when directly questioned." Clara leaned in to whisper something to her husband. He frowned but nodded, then addressed the crowded room. "These proceedings will require testimony from numerous witnesses. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. The prisoners will be held in the jail cells until then." As they were led away, Alara caught a final glimpse of Clara, whose subtle nod suggested this delay had been her doing. But to what end? What could one night's postponement achieve against the forces arrayed against them? The jail beneath the courthouse consisted of 3 small cells with iron bars. Thomas was locked in one, while Alara and Najoni were placed in another. The third remained empty. A single guard took up position at the desk near the entrance, looking bored with his assignment. Once the door to the main courthouse had closed behind Sullivan and Harrison, Alara moved close to the bars, separating her cell from Thomas's. "You should never have come back," he said softly, his battered face creased with concern. "River needs you." "River needs both of us," Alara replied, reaching through the bars to touch his bruised hand. "And I could not leave you to face this alone." Najoni kept watch at the front of their cell, ensuring the guard wasn't listening too closely. "Did Harrison find anything at the ranch?" she asked Thomas. "Maps? Names?" Thomas shook his head, wincing at the movement. "Nothing important. I burned the most incriminating documents before they arrived." A cough racked his body, bringing a fleck of blood to his lips. "But they know about Hannah's camp. They just don't know how to find it." "Which is why they wanted River," Alara realized aloud. "They planned to use him to force Hannah to surrender." Thomas nodded grimly. "Harrison has convinced Sullivan that the underground is part of a larger Apache uprising plot. They're using us as an example to scare others who might help." "What about Clara?" Alara asked, keeping her voice to a whisper. Has she been exposed? I don't think so. She was with Sullivan when they brought me in, playing the traumatized wife rescued from Apache kidnappers. She's taking an enormous risk. Night fell, bringing deeper shadows to the already dim jail. The guard lit a single lantern, casting barely enough light to see by. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, his injuries clearly more severe than he was admitting. Alara watched him with growing concern, powerless to help through the barrier of iron bars. He loves you, Najoni observed quietly, settling beside Alara on the hard bench that served as their bed. The white soldier who learned to see with Apache eyes. Alara didn't deny it. And I him, she admitted for the first time, even to herself. Though it seems we found each other too late. It is never too late for the heart to recognize itself in another, Najoni replied with unexpected gentleness. Even when death approaches. A soft sound from the entrance interrupted their conversation, a key turning quietly in the lock. Alara tensed, ready for whatever new threat might appear. The door opened just enough to admit a slender figure who moved with deliberate stealth. Clara. She hurried to the guard's desk where the young man had dozed off. From her pocket, she produced a small vial, pouring its contents into his coffee cup. When satisfied he wouldn't wake, she approached the cells, keys in hand. We don't have much time, she whispered, unlocking Alara and Najoni's cell first, then moving to Thomas's. Sullivan is meeting with Harrison and the mayor. I slipped away when they started drinking. Clara, Thomas murmured as she helped him to his feet. If they catch you. They won't, she interrupted with surprising confidence. I've planned for this since I returned to Sullivan. She led them through the darkened courthouse to a side door that opened onto an alley. A wagon waited there, driven by an unexpected figure, Joseph, the trader who had delivered supplies to the underground. Quickly, Clara urged, helping Thomas into the wagon bed, where blankets had been arranged to hide them. Joseph will take you to the meeting point. Hannah's people are waiting. Alara paused before climbing into the wagon. You're coming with us? Clara shook her head. I can't. Not yet. There's something I need to finish here. Understanding dawned on Alara's face. Your brother. You're still looking for proof that Sullivan killed him. I found it, Clara replied, her voice hardening. Hidden in his private safe. Letters from my brother detailing the corruption. The plans Sullivan made with Harrison to profit from Apache land after clearing the vermin from it, and records of payments to the men who murdered James when he threatened to expose them. Then come with us, Alara urged. Bring the evidence. What more do you need? Clara's eyes gleamed with cold determination in the moonlight. Justice. Sullivan will face it tomorrow when representatives from the territorial governor arrive for the trial. I've sent them copies of everything. Najoni had already climbed into the wagon, but was watching this exchange with keen interest. Revenge clouds judgment, daughter of Foster, she warned. Be careful it does not consume you. A sad smile crossed Clara's face. It already has. She pressed something into Alara's hand, a folded document. This is for Thomas, my final story for the Boston Globe, detailing everything about the underground, Sullivan's corruption, and Harrison's crimes. It's already on its way to my editor with instructions to publish if I don't send a countermanding telegram within a week. The implications were clear. Clara didn't expect to survive her final confrontation with Sullivan. Alara grasped her hand tightly. There are other ways. Not for me, Clara replied with quiet finality. Now go. Dawn isn't far off. With no choice but to respect Clara's decision, Alara climbed into the wagon. Joseph covered them with blankets and hay before setting the horses in motion, moving unhurriedly through the quiet streets as if on a legitimate late-night errand. As they passed the town limits, Alara lifted the blanket slightly, catching a last glimpse of Clara standing in the shadows of the courthouse, a solitary figure carrying the weight of truth in a place built on lies. They traveled through the night, Joseph taking back roads and game trails to avoid potential pursuit. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, his breathing labored. By first light, they had reached a small clearing, deep in the forest where 3 Apache men waited with horses. Hannah sent us, one explained as they carefully transferred Thomas to a travois attached to the strongest horse. The soldiers are searching the eastern trails, but we will take the western pass. Will he survive the journey? Alara asked, fear tightening her throat as she watched Thomas's ashen face. Hannah is prepared, the man assured her. She has been gathering medicine since you left. The return to the mountain sanctuary took most of the day, every hour increasing Alara's anxiety about Thomas's worsening condition and River's well-being. When they finally reached the hidden entrance, the sun was setting once more, painting the rocky cliffs in fiery gold. Hannah was waiting just inside the passage, her lined face grave as she examined Thomas's injuries. Bring him to the healing lodge, she directed. Quickly. Alara wanted nothing more than to follow, to stay at Thomas's side, but a more powerful instinct pulled her toward the dwelling where River waited. The Apache mother who had cared for him smiled as Alara rushed in, reaching for her son with trembling hands. He has been well, the woman assured her. Strong appetite, strong voice. Tears of relief and love streamed down Alara's face as she held River close, inhaling his sweet scent, counting his perfect fingers. He had grown noticeably in just the short time of their separation, his dark eyes more focused, his tiny hands more coordinated as they grasped at her hair. I will never leave you again, she whispered against his soft head. Never. After feeding River and settling him to sleep, Alara made her way to the healing lodge, a circular structure set apart from the other buildings. Inside, Hannah worked with grim concentration, grinding herbs and heating water, while assistants cleaned Thomas's wounds. Najoni sat nearby, mixing a poultice under Hannah's direction. How is he? Alara asked, her voice catching. Hannah looked up, her expression carefully controlled. The physical wounds I can treat. It is the fever that concerns me most. They gave him no water, no care for his injuries. Infection has set in. Alara moved to Thomas's side, taking his hand gently. His skin burned with unnatural heat, his breathing shallow and rapid. Will he? That is not for me to say, Hannah interrupted. The spirit decides who crosses the divide and who remains. All we can do is give his body the strength to fight. Through the night, Alara remained at Thomas's side, bathing his face with cool water, singing soft Apache healing songs, refusing food or rest for herself. River was brought to her when he needed feeding, but otherwise her focus remained entirely on the man who had saved her when no one else would. Dawn broke, bringing no improvement. If anything, Thomas seemed weaker, his moments of consciousness briefer and less lucid. During one such moment, his fevered eyes found Alara's face. River, is he asked, the word barely audible. Safe, Alara assured him, squeezing his hand. We're all safe, thanks to you. A ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips. Worth it, he whispered before slipping away again into restless unconsciousness. Hannah entered, carrying fresh bandages. She checked Thomas's pulse, her expression revealing nothing. You should rest, she told Alara. You help him nothing by exhausting yourself. I can't leave him, Alara replied stubbornly. Hannah's weathered hand touched her shoulder with unexpected gentleness. He would not want you to suffer. Go, sleep for a few hours. I will send for you if there is any change. Reluctantly, Alara returned to the dwelling she shared with Najoni. River slept peacefully in a small cradle crafted of woven reeds. Beside him sat Clara's folded document, which Alara had nearly forgotten in the chaos of Thomas's medical crisis. She opened it now, reading by the light of a small oil lamp. The article was masterfully written, laying out in clear, powerful language the systematic mistreatment of the Apache on reservations, the corruption of officials like Sullivan, who profited from stolen land, and the heroism of the underground network that saved lives the government had deemed expendable. Thomas Reed featured prominently his transformation from soldier to savior, his unwavering moral courage, his willingness to risk everything for what he knew was right. Clara had created a document that could change public opinion if it reached the right audience. But would it be published in time to help them? And what had happened to Clara herself after their escape? These questions swirled in Alara's exhausted mind as she finally surrendered to sleep, curled protectively around River's cradle. She woke to urgent voices outside. Checking that River still slept, Alara hurried to the door to find the camp in a flurry of activity. Soldiers, explained a young Apache woman rushing past with armloads of supplies. They've found the Western Pass. Fear clutched at Alara's heart. She sought out Hannah, finding her directing the camp's defenders to strategic positions around the perimeter. How many? Alara asked. At least 20, Hannah replied grimly. Harrison leads them. They're an hour away at most. How did they find the pass? Thomas couldn't have told them. Not willingly, Hannah agreed, but Sullivan has other methods of extracting information. There was another prisoner in the town jail when you were brought in, a traitor who sometimes carried messages for us. He must have broken under questioning. The implications chilled Alara to the bone. If Harrison reached the sanctuary with superior numbers and firepower, they had little chance of victory. We need to evacuate, she said. The children, the elderly. There is no time, Hannah cut her off, and nowhere to go that Harrison would not eventually find. No, we must make our stand here. Alara returned to her dwelling, mind racing with desperate plans. River would need protection above all else. Perhaps if a small group slipped away while the main force engaged Harrison. She was gathering essential supplies when Najoni entered, carrying a rifle and ammunition belt. Hannah asked for all who can shoot, she said, offering the weapon to Alara. I am too old for steady aim, but you were the best shot in the tribe once. Alara hesitated, torn between her responsibilities as a mother and her duty to protect the community that had sheltered them. River will be with me, Najoni promised, in the cave behind the spring. It's the most defensible position. With a silent prayer to whatever spirits might be listening, Alara took the rifle, checking its mechanism with practiced hands. It had been years since she had held such a weapon, but the knowledge returned instantly, muscle memory from her days as a tribal scout. As she prepared to join the defenders, a commotion rose from the direction of the healing lodge. Hannah's voice called for help, her usual calm shattered by urgency. Alara rushed over to find Thomas convulsing on his pallet, body arching in violent spasms. Hold him, Hannah ordered, preparing a draft of some dark liquid. Don't let him injure himself further. With Alara and two others restraining him, Hannah managed to get some of the medicine between Thomas's lips. Gradually, the convulsions subsided, leaving him limp and gasping but alive. The fever breaks or it kills, Hannah said, wiping sweat from her brow. This is the crisis point. Alara's heart twisted with the impossible choice before her. Stay with Thomas through his life or death struggle, or help defend the sanctuary against the approaching threat. Hannah seemed to read her thoughts. Go, the elder woman said firmly. I will not leave his side. You are needed elsewhere now. With a last anguished look at Thomas's pale face, Alara shouldered her rifle and joined the defenders gathering near the hidden entrance. 20 men and women, a mix of Apache and white allies, prepared makeshift barricades and checked weapons. The children, elderly and injured, were being moved to the cave system at the back of the sanctuary. Joseph, the traitor who had helped them escape, approached Alara with a grim smile. Not how I expected to die, he commented, but there are worse causes. We're not dead yet, Alara replied with determination, and Harrison is not invincible. They took positions overlooking the narrow approach to the hidden door, the only way in or out of the sanctuary. If they could hold this choke point, even superior numbers would struggle to break through. The wait was excruciating. Every minute stretched like an hour as they listened for approaching hoofbeats. Alara found herself remembering Thomas's words from what seemed a lifetime ago. Everyone deserves a second chance, Alara, even those who've been broken and mistreated. He had given her that chance when no one else would. Now she would fight to ensure his vision of sanctuary survived, even if he did not. The first warning came from scouts positioned farther down the mountain, a single bird call that signaled approaching riders. Alara tightened her grip on the rifle, steadying her breathing as she had been taught as a young scout. The sanctuary had fallen completely silent, even the children hushed by the gravity of the moment. Then came the unexpected. Not the sound of many horses approaching in formation, but a single rider galloping at breakneck speed up the narrow trail. Through her rifle sight, Alara could make out a woman's form, red hair streaming behind her like a banner. Clara, she breathed in disbelief. The hidden door was open just enough to admit the exhausted rider. Clara practically fell from her horse, gasping for breath, her dress torn and dirty, blood seeping from a wound on her arm. Harrison, she managed between ragged breaths. Coming, but not just him. Territorial. Officials. Joseph brought water, which Clara gulped gratefully before continuing. The governor sent representatives to investigate Sullivan's court. When I presented my evidence, Sullivan tried to have me arrested, but the officials intervened. Harrison fled with his most loyal men, maybe 8 total, heading this way. Hope flickered to life in Alara's chest. Only 8? Clara nodded, wincing as someone bandaged her arm. The rest of the cavalry unit was ordered to stand down pending investigation. But Harrison is desperate now. He knows if the sanctuary is found intact, with records of the underground, it confirms everything I've reported. So he means to destroy it, Joseph concluded grimly, and everyone in it. The territorial officials are following, Clara added, but Harrison has at least an hour's head start. They sent me ahead to warn you. The defenders exchanged looks. 8 soldiers was a far more manageable threat than 20, but still dangerous, especially led by a man as ruthless as Harrison. We need to get the women and children deeper into the caves, Alara decided, and prepare for siege. If we can hold Harrison off until the officials arrive, a shout from the lookout interrupted her planning. Riders, less than a quarter mile out. Positions were taken, weapons readied. Alara found herself beside Clara, who had been given a pistol despite her exhaustion. I never thanked you, Alara said quietly, for helping us escape, for everything. Clara's smile was tired but genuine. I owed it to my brother and to Thomas, who showed me what real courage looks like. The sound of approaching horses grew louder. Through a small observation slit in the rock face, Alara could see Harrison and his men reaching the final approach to the hidden door. They dismounted, Harrison barking orders as they unloaded what appeared to be explosives. They're going to blast their way in, Clara whispered in horror. Alara's mind raced. The explosion would likely collapse part of the entrance, possibly trapping them all inside. They needed to act before Harrison could set the charges. On my signal, she told the defenders, we fire a warning volley. Aim above their heads. I want them to know they're facing armed resistance without starting a bloodbath immediately. When Harrison and 2 soldiers moved forward with the explosives, Alara gave the signal. A coordinated volley of rifle fire exploded from the sanctuary's hidden firing positions, sending rock chips flying inches above the soldiers' heads. The men dove for cover, abandoning the explosives temporarily. Harrison, Alara called out, her voice carrying in the mountain air. You're surrounded. Territorial officials are on their way. Surrender now and you'll face a fair trial. Harrison's laugh was audible even at a distance. Fair trial? From who? The Apache-loving governor? I don't think so. His voice hardened. Send out Reed and the woman with her half-breed brat, and maybe I'll let the rest of you vermin live. He's stalling, Clara murmured, waiting for darkness to set the charges. Alara knew she was right. They couldn't wait for the officials. By then it might be too late. A more direct approach was needed. Keep him talking, she instructed the others. I'm going to circle behind them. Before anyone could object, she slipped away, using a small side passage Hannah had shown her that emerged 100 yards down the mountain slope. Moving with the silent skill that had made her the tribe's best scout, Alara worked her way around behind Harrison's position. The captain remained focused on the hidden door, unaware of the danger approaching from his rear. His men had spread out, using rocks and trees for cover, weapons trained on the sanctuary entrance. Alara crept closer, rifle steady in her hands. The weapon felt both familiar and strange, a reminder of the life she'd lived before when she was Alara Eagle-Eye, the tribe's most skilled scout. Through her scope, Harrison's golden head came into perfect focus. At this distance, she couldn't miss. Her finger tensed on the trigger, the metal cool against her skin. One slight pressure, and River would never have to fear this man again. One movement, and she could avenge all the pain, all the humiliation Harrison had brought upon her. The man who had called her his desert flower before casting her aside like withered weeds when she carried his child. Memories flooded her mind. Harrison's blue eyes gazing at her with false tenderness, his promises of protection for her people. The moment his face transformed with disgust when she told him about the child. Then newer memories, Thomas's gentle hands helping her from the auction block, his quiet voice asking not if she could endure pain, but if she was in pain, the way he had looked at River with wonder rather than shame. Killing comes easy, living with it doesn't. Thomas's words echoed in her mind. If she killed Harrison now in cold blood, would she still be the woman Thomas believed she could be? Would she still be the mother River deserved? Her breathing slowed. The hatred that had sustained her for so long suddenly felt hollow, an empty vessel that could never be filled no matter how much vengeance she poured into it. Harrison deserved justice, but not like this. Not through an act that would stain her soul and teach River that violence was the answer. Instead, she shifted her aim slightly and fired, the bullet striking the ground inches from Harrison's boot. He whirled around, face contorted with surprise and rage as he spotted her partial silhouette among the rocks. "Next one goes through your heart," she called out, keeping to cover. "Order your men to drop their weapons." Harrison's eyes narrowed as he scanned the terrain, trying to pinpoint her exact location. His handsome features, once so charming to her, now seemed like a mask hiding the ugliness beneath. "The savage returns," he sneered, but Alara detected a note of uncertainty beneath his bravado. "Come to protect your mongrel child." The slur against River sent a surge of protective fury through her, but she controlled it, knowing that emotional reactions were exactly what Harrison wanted. "That mongrel is your son," she replied, her voice deadly calm. "Though he'll never know it, I'll raise him to be everything you're not: honorable, compassionate, worthy of respect." A muscle twitched in Harrison's jaw. His pride had always been his weakness. "You think you've won? That playing house with a traitor like Reed gives you any place in this world?" He gestured broadly at the mountains around them. "Even if you kill me, others will come. The Apache will be wiped from these mountains, and sympathizers like Reed will hang as traitors. This little fantasy of peace between our kinds is just that, a fantasy." "That time has passed," Alara countered, inching to a better position as she spoke. "The world is changing, Harrison. While you've been hunting us, Clara's been gathering evidence. The truth about the reservations, about men like you and Sullivan, it's already spreading. Clara's story will reach every newspaper in the East." Something dangerous flickered across Harrison's face, not just anger but calculation. His lips curved into a cold smile that sent a chill down Alara's spine. "Clara Foster," he said slowly, relishing each syllable. "Sullivan's troublesome wife. Such a dedicated crusader for justice now." He gave a humorless laugh. "Did she tell you about our arrangement? How she agreed to marry Sullivan to gain access to his records? How she came to me first with her little plan to expose reservation conditions?" The revelation struck Alara like a physical blow. Clara and Harrison had been allies? Her mind raced, trying to reconcile this with everything she knew about Clara. The reporter had admitted to marrying Sullivan for information, but working with Harrison? The man responsible for countless Apache deaths? "You're lying," Alara said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. Harrison sensed his advantage. "She didn't tell you, did she?" Poor naive Alara, still trusting the wrong people. "Clara and I worked together for months, until her conscience inconveniently surfaced when she saw what maintaining order on the frontier actually requires. She couldn't stomach the reality of civilization's advance." Alara's thoughts whirled in confusion. Could it be true? Was that why Clara had seemed so knowledgeable about the underground from the beginning? Why she had found Thomas's ranch so easily? Her momentary distraction was all Harrison needed. She glimpsed movement in her peripheral vision. Harrison drawing his revolver with practiced speed, the glint of metal in sunlight. Time seemed to slow as she realized her mistake. Too late, she tried to duck behind the boulder. Harrison fired. With cold deliberation, he raised his revolver and fired. Time seemed to slow as Alara saw the muzzle flash, felt the impact coming, only to be shoved roughly aside by a figure that seemed to appear from nowhere. The impact sent Alara sprawling as the crack of Harrison's pistol split the air. "No!" The scream tore from Alara's throat as she saw Clara stagger backward, crimson blossoming across the front of her dress like a terrible flower. The reporter's eyes widened with shock, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise as her legs gave way. Alara scrambled forward, catching Clara before she hit the ground. The woman's weight bore them both down to the rocky earth, Clara's head cradled in Alara's lap. Blood, so much blood, pulsed from the wound in Clara's chest, each heartbeat pumping more life away. "What?" Alara demanded, pressing her hand desperately against the wound, knowing even as she did that it was futile. "Why would you do this for me? After everything?" Clara's lips curved in a pained smile, blood bubbling at the corners. Her eyes, once so sharp with reporters' curiosity, were already growing cloudy. "Because Thomas was right about you," she whispered, each word a struggle. "You're the future he fought for, the bridge between worlds." "Don't talk," Alara urged, tears blurring her vision. "Save your strength. Hannah can help. She's the best healer." "Too late for that," Clara interrupted, her voice fading to barely a whisper. One trembling hand reached up to touch Alara's face, leaving a smear of blood against her cheek. "I've done terrible things, compromised, too much. James would understand this end." Around them, gunfire continued as Harrison's men exchanged shots with the sanctuary defenders and the approaching territorial officials. But in this small bubble of tragedy, time seemed suspended. "Tell Thomas. The story will be told. All of it." Clara's breath came in shallow gasps now, her skin growing paler with each passing second. Her eyes, already growing distant, focused one last time on Alara's face with startling clarity. "Raise River. To remember. Both sides of his heritage. Both are valuable." A violent cough shook Clara's body, more blood staining her lips. Her fingers grasped Alara's hand with surprising strength. "Forgive me for not telling you everything. Some secrets were never mine to share." With a final shuddering breath that seemed to hold both relief and regret, Clara Foster, reporter, avenger, unexpected ally, slipped away. Her hand went limp in Alara's grasp, her eyes staring sightlessly at the vast blue sky above. For a moment, Alara couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only hold the cooling body of a woman who had been both enemy and savior. The woman who had saved her life at the cost of her own, carrying her secrets to whatever lay beyond. In the sudden lull of gunfire, Alara became aware of a presence beside her. Najoni knelt down, gently closing Clara's eyes with weathered fingers. "She chose her path," the older woman said softly, compassion tempering the hard truth of her words. "As we all must." She placed a hand on Alara's shoulder, steadying her as she had steadied her through a lifetime of unseen protection. Some find redemption only at the end. In the distance, Harrison lay motionless, multiple bullets having found their mark as the territorial officials returned fire. The man who had caused so much suffering had fallen without the dignity of final words or reconciliation. Just another body cooling on the mountain slopes, his grand schemes for power and wealth turned to dust. Alara looked down at Clara's face, peaceful now in death, and then at Harrison's crumpled form. Two people who had once been allies, then enemies, both now beyond the conflicts that had driven them. The futility of hatred struck her with painful clarity. "Help me carry her," Alara said finally, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her face. "She deserves to be buried with honor, whatever her sins." As they lifted Clara's body, Alara caught sight of River's tiny form, held safely by one of the Apache women who had emerged from the caves. Her son, living proof that life could emerge from even the darkest circumstances, that love could triumph over hatred if given the chance to take root. In that moment, looking between her child and the woman who had died to protect him, Alara made a silent vow. Hope Valley would become what Thomas and Clara and all of them had fought for. Not just a sanctuary for the broken, but the beginning of a new way forward. Najoni approached, placing a hand on Alara's shoulder as territorial officials secured the remaining soldiers. "She chose her path," the older woman said gently, "as we all must." The aftermath unfolded like scenes from a dream. The officials, led by a stern-faced man named Judge Hollister, took statements from everyone at the sanctuary. Evidence of conditions on the reservations was documented, along with Sullivan's corruption and Harrison's crimes. Clara's final article was telegraphed to Boston with the judge's official endorsement, ensuring it would be published with maximum impact. Through it all, Alara moved as if in a trance, dividing her time between Thomas's sickbed and River's cradle. Thomas's fever had broken during the confrontation with Harrison, but he remained terribly weak, drifting in and out of consciousness as his body struggled to heal. On the third day after the battle, Alara sat beside him, River sleeping peacefully in her arms, when Thomas's eyes opened with true clarity for the first time. "Alara," he murmured, voice rough from disuse. "River, You're both safe." Tears of relief spilled down Alara's cheeks. "Yes, we're safe. Harrison is dead. The underground has been officially recognized as a humanitarian effort." She swallowed hard before adding, "Clara didn't survive. She died saving my life." Sorrow darkened Thomas's blue eyes. "She found her redemption then." "As did Najoni," Alara added, "though she lived to enjoy it. She's already organizing expanded gardens for the sanctuary." Thomas's hand sought hers, fingers intertwining weakly. "And what of you? What does Alara Eagle Eye wish for her future now?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with possibility. Alara looked down at their joined hands, one brown, one white, both equally capable of destruction or creation. "A home," she answered simply. "For River, for myself. With a man who sees me as I am, not as the world would label me." "I know such a man," Thomas said softly, a hint of his old humor returning, "though his house needs considerable repair after recent events." Alara smiled through her tears. Hope Valley. It was well named. 1 week later, a small ceremony took place beneath the ancient oak tree on Thomas's property. The ranch had indeed suffered damage during Harrison's occupation, but willing hands had worked to restore it. Now friends from both the town and the mountain sanctuary gathered to witness something few had thought possible: the union of a former cavalry soldier and an Apache woman, brought together by fate, bound by love, united in purpose. Hannah performed the ceremony, combining elements from both cultures. Najoni stood as witness, holding River, whose dark eyes watched the proceedings with infant curiosity. Judge Hollister attended as well, his presence a symbol of the official recognition now granted to the underground's work. As the sun set over Hope Valley, painting the land in gold and crimson, Thomas and Alara exchanged simple vows and silver bands. No elaborate promises were needed. They had already demonstrated their commitment through sacrifice and steadfastness in the face of nearly impossible odds. "What was broken has been made whole," Hannah proclaimed, joining their hands together. "What was lost has been found. May your union bring healing to both peoples, just as you have found healing in each other." Later, as twilight deepened into night, Alara stood on the porch of what was now truly her home, River sleeping contentedly against her shoulder. Thomas joined her, moving slowly but steadily as his strength returned day by day. "I received a telegram from Boston," he said, showing her the paper. "Clara's article has created a sensation. Congressional hearings have been called to investigate reservation conditions." "Will it make a difference?" Alara wondered. "Perhaps not immediately," Thomas admitted. "Change comes slowly, but it comes." He slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her gently against his side. "We've laid the foundation. River's generation will build upon it." Together they looked out over the valley that had become a sanctuary for the broken, a haven for the lost, a home for those who dared to believe that understanding could triumph over hatred. In the distance, the first stars appeared, ancient lights that had witnessed countless human struggles and would witness many more. But tonight in this valley, hope had taken root, and from such beginnings, entire worlds could change. "Look," Thomas murmured, pointing to where a deer and her fawn had emerged at the edge of the garden. The mother stood alert, protective, while the fawn explored on wobbling legs. "Life continues." Alara nodded, feeling the perfect weight of her son in her arms, the comforting presence of the man beside her. "Yes," she agreed softly, "life continues." And in Hope Valley, it would continue not in separation and fear, but in unity and understanding, a living testament to the truth that bridges could be built between worlds once thought forever divided, and that love could indeed triumph over the darkest chapters of human history. As the seasons turned, Hope Valley grew. More cabins appeared alongside Thomas and Alara's home, housing those who sought a different path. Apache families tired of reservation suffering, white settlers disillusioned with the prejudices of their society, men and women of mixed heritage who belonged fully to neither world but created something new between them. On River's first birthday, they gathered beneath the oak tree, once a lonely sentinel over Sarah's grave, now the heart of a growing community. Hannah performed a blessing ceremony, mixing Apache traditions with Christian prayers in a tapestry of belief as diverse as the people who bowed their heads in respect. "From two streams, one river flows," Hannah said, marking River's forehead with sacred clay. "From divided pasts, one future grows." Najoni, who had once sold her stepdaughter like cattle to save her life, now sat beside Alara, her weathered hand resting on River's dark curls. The complexity of their relationship, built on sacrifice, deception, and eventually understanding, reflected the larger story of their peoples, the painful path toward reconciliation. That evening, as darkness fell and stars appeared in the velvet sky, Thomas found Alara sitting on their porch, watching River play with the other children. Apache, white, mixed blood, all laughing together in the language of childhood that needed no translation. Judge Hollister sent word, Thomas said, settling beside her. Congressional hearings have begun on reservation conditions. Clara's articles are being read on the Senate floor. Will it change anything? Alara asked, leaning against his shoulder. It already has, he replied, slipping an arm around her waist. Look around you. Their gazes swept across the valley, garden plots freshly turned for spring planting, smoke rising from cabin chimneys, the schoolhouse where Hannah now taught both Apache traditions and English letters to children of all backgrounds. This is just the beginning, Thomas continued. What we've built here, it's a seed. It will spread. Alara thought of all they had endured to reach this moment. The auction block where Thomas had first seen her, the storm-racked night of River's birth, the bullets that had claimed both enemies and allies. The path had been marked with blood and tears, but it had led them here, to this peaceful evening under the stars. River asked about his father today, she said quietly. Thomas tensed slightly beside her. What did you tell him? The truth, Alara replied, that the man whose blood he carries gave him life but not love. And the man who gives him love chose him freely, which makes it the greater gift. Thomas's eyes shone with emotion in the fading light. He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. One pale, one brown, both bearing the marks of hard work and harder choices. I choose you both, he said simply. Every day. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound echoing off canyon walls. River looked up from his play, pointing excitedly at the first evening star appearing above the eastern mountains. Star, he called out in a mixture of Apache and English, his small face alight with wonder. Alara smiled, feeling the perfect rightness of this moment. Her son discovering the world anew, her husband beside her, their community growing around them. From the depths of despair, they had climbed towards something precious and rare, a place where different worlds could meet without one destroying the other. Hope Valley. It had been well named indeed.